Mercury retrograde often invites us to reevaluate or reimagine, to go back and look at it another time. And, you know, there's a sense of moving backwards. Mercury is literally moving backwards in the sky. And so there's a sense of going back whenever we see a retrograde planet like this. But one of the things that we can notice with what we've got going on here this week is that it's not just about going back. And in fact, time does not go back. We have to move forward all the time. Even though we are maybe backward looking at this point, we still have to go forward with it. So we have seen a lot of disruption happen lately. Maybe we've said some things that were a little ugly, or that broke some barriers of some sort, that were transgressive in some kind of way, especially aggressively. So, you know, with this Mercury conjunct Mars. But there's a certain point at which the words have left your mouth and you don't get to put them back, right? And so, or the toothpaste is out of the tube. The toothpaste does not go back in the tube. And so, even if there is a question of reevaluation and maybe being like, well, maybe I didn't want this, or maybe this wasn't actually in line with my values or something like that backward looking influence still requires some kind of like, okay, well, but I have already done the thing, but we have already disrupted things such that we're gonna have to find a new way forward. And having that kind of ability to be flexible and find an innovative opportunity is the thing that we've got going on this week. What's up, y'all? It's your boy Zamboni. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to get an astrology reading, or if you want to find some dope ass music or some dope ass merchandise, or if you want to learn astrology, ZamboniFunk.com is the place to do that. Thank you so much for being here. And thank y'all so much for showing out for my birthday last week. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It is very meaningful to me to see such an outpouring of love. So thank you so much. That really helps me to know that what I'm doing matters to somebody. So thank you so much. Let's talk about the astrology of the week ahead this week. We've got Mercury retrograde than a motherfucker. It is a lot. This Mercury retrograde is doing the most, doing the absolute most. This week, we at least get to see Mercury moving away from Mars. Mars and Mercury have both been hanging out together for a long time. They've been in Sagittarius for the last couple of weeks. Mercury is moving backwards, and so moving from Sagittarius into Scorpio and moving toward the sun. We're actually going to see the Mercury cazimi this week. So we're going to see Mercury and the sun coming together. And that is the midpoint of the Mercury retrograde. A lot of times Mercury retrograde is going to have to be have to do with like confusion or miscommunications and this kind of thing. And then the cazimi moment, that moment of conjunction with the sun, tends to be some kind of clarity, some kind of like, aha, eureka kind of moment, right? There is an insight that can come from that helps you to be like, okay, so how are we going to like fix the problem that came up at the beginning of the Mercury retrograde, right? So it's a moment of, it's a bit of a turning point where it's like, okay, if we keep going, then we can make some new kind of moves here. Now, what's interesting about this one is that as Mercury moves back into Scorpio, we're actually going to see an opposition to Uranus at the very end of Taurus. So on the way in, we saw an opposition to Uranus in the beginning of Gemini, but now that we're moving backwards, we are forced to reevaluate some of the major disruptions that Uranus and Taurus has described. Now, what's interesting about Uranus and Taurus is that Uranus is the planet of disruption and chaos and surprises and things moving, left field dynamics is the way I like to think about Uranus a lot of times. Uranus has been in Taurus for the last 7 years or so. And Taurus is a very firm, steady kind of sign. It's something, it like is generally kind of heavy and plodding and this kind of thing, right? And so Uranus there has disrupted a lot of things that you would typically prefer to stay stable, and so we've seen like commodity prices have been crazy, and the nature of value and money in general has been very volatile and this kind of thing over the last 7 years or something. And so that sort of stuff looks like it is under review while Mercury retrograde in Scorpio opposes that Uranus in Taurus. So this looks like the kind of situation where things are very likely to be uncomfortable. Things are very likely to be kind of weird. And it's that thing where it's like, okay, we have disrupted things in such a major way. We could think about, like the cultural revolution stuff, the sexual revolution stuff, the culture war dynamic that's been going on that has disrupted everyone's, technological revolutions, all of this kind of stuff. Like, we don't live in the ways that ancestors lived. So everything is disrupted. And so how are we going to do it? Are we going to go back to the old ways of doing things? Of course, we're not going to do that. We can't do that. That is an impossible task, and it would not even be desirable in the first place. So forward is the only direction, right? We can only go forward from here. But what does that mean? What does that mean to us? What kind of values do we keep? Why do we hold these values? And if we hold those values, but we are in a new landscape now, then how do we bring that set of values to the forefront? This is a moment where we are likely to have, right? So the Mercury Cazimi, that is very good for insight. That's very good for clarity and understanding, right? Because that is directly opposite to that Uranus and Taurus, we can guess that some good ideas are going to take place under this kind of arrangement. But it's almost like, okay, so the middle of a retrograde cycle like this is a little bit like if you are, let's say that Mercury retrograde, Mercury is the planet of transportation and stuff like that, intelligence, understanding. Retrograde is going to flip that Mercury on its head, and so it's going to generate confusion, miscommunication, delays, detours, that sort of thing, right? So I like to think about Mercury retrograde as like being lost in the woods, right? Just don't really, you've lost your bearings, not really sure where you are, what's going on, right? And so as you just got to keep going, right? And then there's a moment, that Cazimi moment is in the middle, and it's this sense of like, okay, we have made it to the middle of the forest. So any direction, if you just keep going, then now you're moving out of the forest because you're not moving in any longer, right? And so there's, even though there's still a sense of like, I'm not really sure what's going on out here, but we're in the middle such that if I just keep going, then I'll figure it out. Something will happen, right? So this is a little bit like that, where almost you have to double down on your disruptions a little bit, right? You don't get to go back to the old way of doing things. So given that truth, you're gonna have to keep moving forward in some kind of way. And so that's why it's so deeply important to be sure of what's really real. Uranus is not just about disruption, but is also about letting your freak flag fly in some kind of way. Uranus is very strong on uniqueness and especially personal freedom. I really love Uranus for personal freedom. A great example of this is Frederick Douglass, a famous American slave who got free and became an extremely important abolitionist. He got free under a full moon in Pisces conjunct Uranus, right? So he made his liberation escape under Uranus, under a full moon and conjunct Uranus, right? And it was in Pisces, and so he did it by sea. It's really amazing astrology there. But so the idea here is that taking control of one's own destiny or being free in some kind of way is integral to the way that Uranus operates here. And so as Mercury is retrograde and we get this Cazimi moment, we get this moment of insight and clarity, a lot of what we can notice here is the necessity of reclaiming agency, of taking responsibility for what is yours and doing that thing and letting it be real, letting it be free, letting it be the actual thing that you really think in, or that you really believe, or that you really feel in your heart, the thing that is actually real, not letting that be masked any longer, because things are so wildly disrupted that the only way to create the thing that would actually be functionally useful is such radical truth and honesty that it might even still be disruptive and uncomfortable.